Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the red and white supporting Santa Clara loving Teos Abadia. Hey
The
Teos, how's it
Team 2
going?
is in effect.
Yes.
Go Santa Clara.
So what happens if Duke plays Santa Clara?
Duke wins. Statistically speaking, historically speaking. So it's not too hard for
Historically,
me, but
yeah.
I cheer on both, and either way I win. That's the way it works.
Santa Clara is a Division One school, right?
Yeah, it is. They don't have
Yeah.
a football team, but they have a basketball team. Their women's soccer is really strong. Yeah, I've already got like their games mapped out and stuff, so I can cheer them on. I'm hoping for greatness this year.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, speaking of greatness, we have some really great listeners out there who ask us some really great questions. And in fact, this week we had two really, really great questions that sort of overlapped. So we're
Yeah.
going to do a bit of a deep dive into answering these two questions. The first one is the short version from Paul Bigby via YouTube, who says, where is the subsystem in any WotC D&D material that anchors the divine-powered character to the goals of the deity? And yes, I know a DM and a player can make up some narrative answer, but that's table-specific and has no mechanical incentive or consistency. Clerics and druids are, right now, just different flavors of wizards, and paladins are merely a multi-classed fighter wizard. Second question. Yeah, second question from Michael Draper via Patreon. This is sort of the longer version. Hi, your discussion of gods and planes in the 2024 Player's Handbook touched briefly on how clerics choose their god and how this determines the domains they can use for their spells. The act of choosing the god for a cleric character doesn't just affect that character, it also alters the setting of the game. Specifically, when the player chooses their cleric's god, they are making it canon that this god's power is active in that world. That's not a minor detail they're adding to the setting. That's defining the ongoing presence of a god in their game. How much of their game leans into that in play may vary, but that god's presence is there as long as that cleric is around. This seems like a fertile concept for class design, providing character creation choices that simultaneously define aspects of the character and the setting, and in doing so enhances the setting and the player character's ties to it. Yet only three D&D classes, clerics and to a lesser extent paladins and warlocks, seem to do this. The other classes involve choices that are essentially limited solely to that character. Now here's the question part. Is D&D missing out by not applying this character design concept to other classes? What if rogues had to choose a guild and a role as the way to get their subclass? What if other classes also got to choose setting-wide organization or affiliation and their role or tie to that to choose their subclass or other abilities? I could see how this could require creating pantheon equivalents. That might be good or a bad thing if you had to do it for every class, like the way Eberron has its houses. I'm interested in your thoughts on the way choosing a cleric's god influences the game at the table, and on the merits or otherwise extending this design concept to other classes. Whew, okay. So
Wow. That was a really two really cool
yeah.
conflicting questions. I think we have to put both of these folks in a cage match, and that's the only way to do it.
But really, they're asking the same question, right? They're asking, why does this choice that's seemingly so important not seem so important, and how could we make it more important for everyone?
Yeah.
And so,
should we?
Yeah, it should be, and that's what we're going to get to. How especially how the second question of Michael Draper via Patreon,
love it.
Was here's how I would do it. Now the question is, should we? So let's talk about all of this. Yeah. The first thing I want to say is, if you've listened to me before, you know I talk about the 3 F's of game design, right? Fun,
they're all
flavor,
swear words,
and freaking balanced. So what these two questions are talking about is what flavorful to me is about. It's making the rules illuminate and illustrate the setting in which your game takes place, and the tone and the style and the atmosphere of your game. So you definitely want to always keep that in mind as you design the rules for your game. and make the rules you make work not only for the mechanics, but also for the setting.
Mm-hmm.
However, and here is what you always need to keep in mind. Making those rules too restrictive can be detrimental to the fun of certain kinds of players and maybe a majority of the players.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of these gods being important in your game is great until you have a setting where there are no gods
Mm-hmm.
or where you want to de-emphasize gods. That is why I was super happy to see domains be emphasized for clerics rather than gods, because or oaths be highlighted for paladins rather than gods in the core rules, not necessarily in setting books, but in the core
Mm-hmm.
rules. Because then if I play in Dark Sun or if I play in Grim Hollow, and the player who has only read the player's handbook comes to me and starts saying, well, what god do I choose in this? Then I have to explain, well, there are no gods here.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to map these gods to these different things. With domains, you can have that,
Yeah.
but the work is done in the setting rather than in the main game. I'm going to stop there and let you talk, Teos.
I mean, it's amazing. I love both of these comments. I think that the question of what a cleric does for the game is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I can't get over is that I feel like it's changed and I can't exactly put my handle on why, but I feel like in the various campaigns that I ran or were run for me, deities were more important.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's that they were like, I mean, from all the angles, from the setting would make it more important, right? You'd run into a church and it was of this god, and it was like a big part of play. And there were penalties for crossing your alignment or deviating from the expected way that you work. And and yeah, I agree with what Michael says, where like when you chose a deity to worship, well, suddenly that becomes highlighted in the world. And the DM will
Mm-hmm.
probably riff off of that. Well, if you chose, this god, well, this is the anti-god to them, and that becomes a part of it.
Right.
I think that the setting can be a part that does that, but I would rather almost say, hey, it's Dark Sun, there are no gods, so just strike that from your character sheet, than create a place where, to me, domains are a little too separate from the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay, but it ends up with this effect where there's almost too few hooks into the setting. And maybe if it was something like, I don't know, your domain is weather, and we saw ways to hook that into all the weather things in the game, from what the climate is today to what people are growing in the small town to the priests and the whatevers, the churches that are there. But I feel like that ends up not happening as the result of it. I don't know if you feel that way.
I understand that, and I want all of that work done in the setting.
Mm,
I want the game to be
mm,
a tool with a skeleton or a blueprint. And then I want the setting to say, here is how we are going to do this particular thing. Because I want my player to be able to worship Umberlee, but take the trickery domain or take trickery themed things. I don't want the player to sit down and say, here's the concept for my character. I worship Umberlee, the storm goddess,
mhm.
the harsh weather sea goddess,
Right.
I but my backstory is that I trick people into taking these long ocean voyages, and then my goddess strikes them down, and then I send the crew later and pick up their wreck. So I'm really a
Yeah.
rogue, but I am a cleric. But the rules say, here is my goddess. I have to do these things. And that's not
Mm,
what I want to do. Now, I can, as the DM, say, okay, well, just take the trickery domain and we'll just say you worship that. But by tying it into, again, this tool set that we have, you are eliminating choices. And that's why I don't want subclasses tied to organizations. I don't
Mm,
want to say you need to belong to the Thieves Guild to be able to take this feat or this
right.
subclass.
Yeah.
Now, in a specific kind of campaign, I think that's wonderful. If you want to create your world that does that, please do. And I think there are, Living Greyhawk did that great as the supplements came out. They said all this stuff is locked away.
Mm.
However, if you join this organization, you can take this extra feat, not extra feat, but this feat that's in a supplement. But you need to, and that was great for that campaign.
Yeah, I guess I don't feel like the rules, like if I say take a look at second edition or first edition and I compare it to third or fourth, I don't know that truly one is saying to a cleric or a paladin. I mean, I guess paladin's pretty arguable, but
For a
let's say to a
paladin, it
cleric.
definitely said
Yeah,
that.
paladin is pretty hard to get past, but I don't know that it was like both sort of say like you have a deity, choose it. But
Mhm.
then you end up in the domain of the setting, right? What are the deities available? Which are you choosing? You know, what does that matter? But to me, it's more that the hooks that tie into that deity have become lessened, right? The spells don't care, the settings care less, the adventurers don't care at all, generally,
Mhm.
right? Um,
Mhm.
and so that to me has a negative impact in play in terms of the things that you interact with, to the same extent that I would say that like if you choose to be a rogue and you are playing an urban game, well, that thieves guild will come up,
Mhm.
right? And if for
Yeah.
somehow we did a thing that caused it not to, well, that would be a loss, right? That's sort of how I feel about it, if it makes sense.
And I just go back to, you can always do that in your setting. It's easier to add something than it is to take
Mhm.
something out.
Mm.
If we go back to first edition, right, clerics couldn't use bladed weapons,
Right.
no matter what god you worshipped, no matter what, you
It's because
just
Jeremy Crawford wasn't around.
exactly. And so if the base rules tell you something is true,
Mm-hmm.
that's what people will default to a fault.
Yeah.
And it's I
Mm.
agree. I
Mm.
think we agree in principle, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We want there to be rich story. We
Yes.
want things to tie together. We want
Yeah.
players to think about the choices they make, and we
Yeah.
want those choices to affect everything.
And that's a way that you could make me happy and maybe answer both these questions to say like, hey, whatever your character class happens to be, what are your
Mhm.
ties to the setting? And with clerics and paladins, there's a real obvious one there. Like, what is it that you are serving? Right?
Right.
You are serving someone, you are bound to someone. Just like if you're a warlock, you are bound through this pact. Well, your pact isn't a vacuum, it's not just some concept out in the ether. It ties into this setting.
Mhm.
How?
Yeah.
Right? You're a rogue.
Right.
Hey, you're probably an independent, but maybe
Yeah.
you had ties before. Or what do you think? What kind of organization would appeal to you? Right? Like you start thinking about and then working on that. Now
Mhm.
you create these ties either way.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a thing we agree the book could do.
And right. And 2014 had that.
Mhm.
It had that in a place, unfortunately, that people ignored because it wasn't mechanically relevant. And those
Mhm.
were the bonds, flaws,
Mhm.
personality traits, and goals. And so you could be anything you want. You could be any kind of paladin you want. You could be any kind of cleric you want. And you could
Mm.
say, okay, uh, think of uh, I worship the god of magic,
Mhm.
but I worship the god of magic because I hate magic.
Right.
And so I'm in
Yeah.
my traits or in my flaws or in my goals, I'm going to tie myself to the world that way.
Yes.
And then you're not restricted in playing a certain character in a certain way, but they
Yeah.
didn't
And
tie
fascinating
it.
that 2024 removes those pieces, and
Right.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I did
Mhm.
not love Bond's flaws and whatever, and I'll get into that in a second, but it doesn't add something to put those factors back in or reroute that energy to something else. It just removes them, which I
Right.
definitely don't like, right? Because you should have something that tells you where your backstory comes from, what your factors are that guide play, tie you into the setting, all of that.
Mhm.
And again, I think that should be in the core, right? Like it's not just that a setting should say, "Hey, it's Eberron. How do you tie into this?" Like, yeah, it should say that there too, but
Mhm.
at the core level, it should say, "Hey, player, look for how you know how you integrate to this world, into this
Mhm.
game. What is it you care about?" And the problem with bonds and flaws and ideals and all that, one is there were too many of them, so nobody could
Mhm.
remember them, right? Even your own player had trouble
Yeah.
remembering them, but five players couldn't remember each other's, and the DM could not remember all five. And I remember
Mhm.
trying in the early days of Adventures League, setting up, I had a spreadsheet kind of
Right.
format, and I would write down people's things. It was impossible to DM to all
Yeah.
those things, right? Far easier is a game of 13th Age, as I've said many times, where I could just say, "What's your one
Mhm.
unique thing?" And bam, I can write one
Mhm.
thing down for each of those characters, and everybody's playing off of that. You can write it on a table tent, fold it up, see each
Mhm.
other's things, and you're boom,
Yeah.
you're playing off that concept. And then icons, right, in 13th Age
Mhm.
are these big group things that help you do that on a richer level of saying, I am linked to the rogue prince and I am in enmity with the dwarves, right? And I'm neutral with the diabolist, right? And those things can just now be those seeds for play at the setting level, whatever your setting may be. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. I know we agree. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of where that weight belongs
Yeah.
and how much what prickled at the back of my neck was that idea in the question of uh rogues having to choose a guild
Yeah.
and
Sure.
roll as a way to get their subclass.
Yeah.
Story-wise, story in your campaign, absolutely do that. But I just don't want that done in the base rules. I don't want,
Yeah.
to be a second story thief
Right.
or whatever that
Yeah.
subclass is now,
And
right?
I
You need to join
agree.
a guild.
I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with that. Like, I don't want to see
Yeah.
you must choose your guild or you must choose your fighting brigade or whatever. And, for each
Right.
class, the reason deities are there
Mhm.
is because they are, historically speaking, such a huge part of a setting, right? What is a
Mhm.
setting but a magical world dominated by gods? Almost all, right? There are only a few that really deviate from that. And so, if there are these enormous powers at bay, then those are paramount, right? And when you are a cleric, I mean, we can't not know. You got to tell me who you worship, right? Or play off of that, right? Like in the
Mhm.
Fallbacks novel, the cleric does not worship any one god. He makes deals with all of them, and
Mhm.
that's a fun way to do it too, right?
Yeah.
You're playing against type. That's fine too, but you've got to have an answer. And your answer can be, "Oh, I don't know,"
Mhm.
or whatever it is, right? But that answer is important because the roles that deities play in almost all settings should be huge, even though somehow we've strayed from that.
Mm,
Mm.
I've said my piece. I think I've already said my piece. I don't need to say it again.
Yeah, yeah.
I will simply say rules are a toolbox.
Mhm.
Uh, if you make your tools too specific,
Yeah,
you are limiting how a game master and their players can use that tool.
agreed.
Okay. Well, that's what a way to start. What a way to
That's
start.
great.
So thank you to Michael and to Paul for those questions. You can ask your questions all the ways, and we'll talk about all those at the end of the episode.
And our main segment is going to talk about setting, which kind of links
Mhm.
into a lot of what this is a nice warm up.
It absolutely does. We're going to talk about building the perfect setting book. So you can come back at the end of or come back for the next segment to hear about that. In the meantime, let's get into some news and commentary, starting with an interesting press release from Wizards of the Coast that has triggered a lot of discussion by people who aren't me. Uh, D&D 2024 Players Handbook sales, according to this press release from Wizards of the Coast, exceeded the initial sales of 2014 Player's Handbook, and it also became the fastest selling D&D book ever.
Of all time.
Of all time. So this press release said that Tasha's Cauldron of Everything had been the fastest selling D&D book, but the 2024 Player's Handbook has already surpassed that. So Teos, explain what fastest selling D&D book of all times means.
Well, it's hard to say because, they didn't say like first day or, some number of hours. But if we look at, when the press release came out, it had been roughly a week. So Tasha's, we got some data from BookScan back a bit ago. And was it last June, something like that? Not this June, but the one before that. And in those numbers, it showed Tasha's with 125,838 first week print copies sold through the BookScan series of outlets, big box stores, Amazon, things like that. I estimate that maybe BookScan is 20 to 34% of print sales. We're just talking print here. So that's a lot, right? More than 125,000, add another 20% to that. So another, 24,000 or something. That's 160, something like that. Is my math remotely right? Check me at home. But it's a huge number. And Wizards is saying 2024 Players Handbook is even higher. On the internet, you'll hear everything from revisionist folks saying like, well, of course it's that big. I always knew it would be because, if you think about it, there's so many players that of course they picked up the Player's Handbook. But those folks were probably saying 2 months ago, oh, nobody's buying this new book. The old book is how everybody's going to be playing and 2024 is dead. So you get a lot of variants on the internet. For Wizards to say that the Player's Handbook has sold 3 times as many as the 2014 version, that's great, right? Like, assuming that's all 100% accurate, that is fantastic. D&D has grown a lot since 2014, which is also amazing and fantastic and fortunate. But we have to factor in that, Shawn, this is not like 6e. It's another 5e. And you can argue about how that's been explained to us or whatever, but the end of it is it's always tricky to have a new version, whatever it is, and convince people that, hey, everything is fully compatible, so you kind of don't need this, but boy, you really want it. And if they really printed 3 times as many and are selling 3 times as many, that's amazing. And some darn good planning to have that match up of 3 times as many printed, 3 times as many sold. There's some more data in this press release, Shawn. You want to chat about that?
Well, yeah, the press release also, they printed 3 times as many copies, like you said. And so they give us another estimate about how many people have played D&D worldwide. In 2022, they gave us an estimate of 50 million people. Now they're saying 85 million. So again, if this is even in the realm of correct, that's 30 some percent more have played since 2022. So in the last 2 years, another 35 million people have played D&D.
Wow. And that is like, ever touched it kind of thing, but that's still an enormous jump in how many people they say have played it.
Right. And I believe this, just knowing the world in which we live and the newer people coming up through the school systems and out into the world. They are fans of this type of entertainment.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, if I look at like my son during the pandemic, before including, telling me, oh, there's 5 groups in our high school playing D&D. That's a lot of kids at just one high school, right? And there are how many high schools in our city? Like just a ton, right? And then a couple of other high schools worth of kids have reached out to me in one way or another. So I mean, yeah, maybe, I don't know. It's a big jump. It's a surprising jump to me, adding 35 million. But either way, a lot of people have played D&D, and I'm not going to quibble about that number too much.
Yeah, well, I mean, anecdotally, I went in to talk to the local college's game club, and they told me what room it was in, and I went to the room, and I realized it wasn't one room; it was 3 rooms, and it was full. It was full of, I thought there might be like 20, we're
Right.
looking
Yeah.
at like
Yeah.
100 people. And then I went and talked to the Writers Club. Uh, and before they did a show of hands, how many of you play D&D or role-playing games? And again, this was a table of maybe 30 people,
Mm.
and all but like 5 raised their hand. And the 5 that
Yeah.
didn't raise their hand were the president and the secretary and the treasurer of this club, and they just looked at me stunned, and I'm like, and they went, wow. And I'm like, yes, there are a lot of people playing this game.
Mhm.
So that
Yeah.
number makes sense to me. But in addition, they stated that D&D Beyond has over 18 million registered users. And this is what they also claimed in the Q2 2024 call. How many were there in 2022? 13 million registered users.
Yeah. Now that
So,
interests me, Shawn, because 18 million is actually the number we had heard before, right? As you're saying.
yeah.
So it's like we added 35 million ever
Mhm.
played D&D. We didn't add to D&D Beyond. And I wonder if that, I mean, it's not been a long time, right? I'm talking about the Q2 2024 call, but at some
Yeah.
point there was a reason to adjust one and not just the other. That can just be different data sets. But, maybe it means, I'm sure they would have liked to have increased that number. And so they probably looked pretty
Yeah.
hard, is my guess, to increase it and couldn't. I don't know. Interesting.
So on September 25th, the Player's Handbook debuted on the USA Today bestseller list at number 57. It's
Mhm.
strong. It's not the highest that we've ever seen it for a 5e release, but for, like you said, for a new 0.5 edition, if you will,
Bad.
that's pretty good sales. What else do we know about this?
So, one of the things that people have been trying to reconcile is these numbers, which are fantastic from the D&D marketing group, and it looks like it came, from the Wizards side rather than the Hasbro side, or kind of reconcile that with whatever people imagine the edition should do, right?
Yeah.
And then what made it more interesting is BookScan sales data being shared again by Stephen Glicker on his YouTube channel. And this data came across as the first week being 3,773 copies sold in BookScan in the US.
Mhm.
And, it was done in a way that sure felt like it was being done for clicks. You can decide for yourself. A lot of drama. And this was talked a lot about, all over the internet space amongst those little bubbles of us that talk about things like D&D online. I do think that number is really suspect, right? But there's a lot behind it, the why of it, right? Why is this number so low? It doesn't make a and should we believe it, right? So, and you can look at things to try to figure it out, like, well, Amazon has one page for the 2024 player handbook, which is the same as the 2014 one. You buy the player's handbook and you choose the version.
Mhm.
So that kind of prevents it from having its own rank. You can analyze it. Maybe that's
Mhm.
also causing these book scan sales to be weird. I mean, I noted when I looked at the previous book scan set data 2 years ago or a year ago, whenever that was, that data sometimes had things like Critical Role books would be like smushed together. Like you couldn't get the new book. You had to see the Green Ronin one, right? And so like when things like that happen, it can throw stuff off. That might be why. Why this number doesn't make sense is because we know like 3,000 were sold at Gen Con in a heartbeat.
Mhm. Yeah.
We hear gaming stores all over the place reporting strong sales, multiple reports of distributors running out of books that, they can't give them any, stores talking about how like they convinced their distributor to give them their last 20, like things like that.
Mhm. Right.
We also had a report from the UK book scan showing that those numbers are higher than that US number, right? That's like 3,800 or something like that. It's a little higher. And we know the population of the UK and the interest level in the UK is not what the US is.
Yeah.
There are reports on ICV2, around this. So none of it really makes sense for the book scan numbers to be that low. Why are they that low? We don't know. And there are a lot of people guessing. And I would just caution to not, not go, oh, I saw this thing, therefore, right? Like either something major has caused book scan to lag behind in its reporting. And there's a whole bunch of numbers to add to this number. In which case, we'll see this eventually, right? Eventually, when you look at what the first month sales or 2 months or 3 months or whatever, or lifetime, and you know it's been 3 months and you're looking at lifetime, you will see a more normal data amount come out of it. So hopefully we get somebody who shares that, some time from now and we can look at it. Otherwise, it means there's been a titanic, unimaginable shift of how D&D is sold from normal print channels to other, like everybody's buying it from D&D Beyond. And realistically, that just doesn't make sense, Shawn, because it means like all of America has just shifted how it buys. That's not generally how those things happen. So it's an interesting, riddle, and we'll have to figure out why it's wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know that they ran a special through D&D Beyond where you could get the digital and the print copy for a reduced rate. So people who were invested in, who were going to buy it no matter what, who are already on D&D Beyond, already paying or signed up on D&D Beyond, if they are your invested buyers, they are likely going to, or possibly going to, use that route anyway.
Yeah.
So it would make sense if the numbers were skewed a little bit in that direction.
But a little bit. I mean, again, this would be such a titanic shift to suddenly say and no one's buying it on Amazon, right? Like, that's unlikely, right? No one's ever going to their Barnes and Noble anymore because everybody who previously purchased from a D&D Beyond is now. 3,700 is such a laughably small number.
Yeah.
Compared to like Tasha's, right? It had 124,000. So you have D&D saying, Wizards saying, we sold more than 124,000 plus 20%. And then to say, and even if they're counting digital, right? And you can, it's still, seems 3,700 is just, it would mean, I don't know, people have vastly changed their purchasing. And the thing is, we got to remember that like the fans online are not representative of all fans, right? Like all those player handbook sales for 2014 didn't come from the few invested people we see posting on EN World, right? It's a very wide network of disparate people who buy in disparate ways. For them to all shift to D&D Beyond would be bizarre.
Yeah, it would be. And what we see is what we see in most of life at this point. It's people looking to back up their opinions. And if there is data out there that does not back up their opinion, it's either a lie or incorrect or there's something wrong with the data. It can't be my opinion's wrong. It's got to be this other thing. So we'll continue to keep an eye on things, but for the most part, the book is out. We are reading it. We are discussing it. We are using it for in our games mostly. So that's what is the important thing, at least for me, who works in the industry.
Yep.
But what I don't do is make music. But I can buy D&D on vinyl for the 50th anniversary. It's a licensed offering from Bardic Inspiration. It's a vinyl record that celebrates the anniversary with 12 tracks reflecting a musical journey through the Forgotten Realms. Are you buying this, Teos?
I mean, I kind of feel like I have to. I own the Spelljammer vinyl that came out previously. And, I always, I still don't have a physical copy of the Shawn City of Towers music that came during 3rd edition and in the back of that book. So I need to get that one of these days because that's such a awesome piece. I think the Spelljammer wasn't quite as good as that. It's fun, but it's sort of wacky. Maybe deliberately so. I think deliberately so. So we'll see how good this is. Hopefully we can do some little previews and stuff. There's not a link yet on when it comes out or where we can purchase it, but it's apparently going to be $50 and you can get it on a double vinyl or digital. We'll see.
Well, the vinyl has been found, but Uni has been lost, or at least Uni's horn has. The 80s D&D cartoon adventure Uni and the Lost Horn is now available on D&D Beyond. We knew this was coming out. It was said it would be an exclusive for conventions like PAX West and some gaming stores. However, that exclusivity is now no more. If you're a D&D Beyond subscriber, you can get the adventure. It is designed for 4 to 6 level 4 characters, including the pre-gens, of the protagonists from the animated series: Bobby, Diana, Eric, Hank, Presto, and Sheila. There's also now a seventh character for Nico, a cleric from a different set of adventurers who recently tumbled into the D&D multiverse. Now, you ran this, Teos.
Yeah. I ran
Yeah.
it back when it was being play tested, and then I was working with many DMs who ran it for many players at PAX West. It's a cool adventure. I highly recommend it. Um, it's fun. Will Doyle and Stacey Allen wrote this. They write such good, flavorful stuff. And it feels like the cartoon, right? Like one thing you know about Will and Stacey, they understand the assignment, right?
Yeah.
Even if
Oh,
their
yeah.
assigners don't know it, they know it. And so you get a very cartoon-like experience. You've got bullywugs, and you've got Kalak and Venger and angles going in, and that are very fun and cartoonish. And yeah, I totally think it's a great one shot. I will say the pre-gens have these magic items that are really strong. Not only are they 2024 characters, but these magic items, I mean, Bobby can create the Fisher with his hammer, and the cleric Nico can like summon an angel multiple times, which is way too many. One would be fine, or really too strong, maybe even. But so that makes it really strong, which is fine for this one shot because you want the kid cartoons to win. But if you do decide to make a campaign out of it, you will want to fine tune those magic items to not have a blow away. Or if you want to play this with their own characters, realize that they won't have the magic items that make them as strong as you have in this version.
There you go. Ooh. Mini corner with Teos.
I love it.
What new minis are out there for us, i.e. you, to drool over?
Well, WizKids has a weird lag time on everything. They'll announce a thing, it'll take forever to come out. Like the Vecna minis are just coming out now, which is like, what? And I think the anniversary minis just came out like a month ago. So you never know with them, but they announced a new visible box set with 7 pre-painted minis based on the Baldur's Gate 3 characters. $50 gets you those 7 pre-painted minis. You can get, if you've played the game, you can guess who's in it. Yes, they're probably there. There is also a blind box set featuring 40 new minis from the video game. This includes monsters and NPCs and all sorts of stuff. Each booster is $25. It comes with 1 large and 3 medium or small minis. Whew, those prices. And you'd have to buy a lot of it to get all 40. So decide how much you love it. We've got a link to ICV2 there where we saw this announcement. Yeah, it's kind of wild. We've said, I think folks have said like, why haven't they done enough on Baldur's Gate 3? And the truth is, we continue to see more and more of this come out. And maybe it's a little later than you want, but here it is.
Awesome. Now over to our creator corner, where we start with Horizons Magazine, a new company called Wild Mage Press, created by Hannah Rose and Clara Daly, are launching Horizons Magazine for 5e D&D and for other role-playing games. It will be a quarterly magazine featuring at least 3 D&D articles and then 1 article for a different role-playing game. Upcoming role-playing games that will be featured will include Pathfinder and Candela Obscura in the first few issues. October 9th will be the release of the first issue. You can go to a Patreon to subscribe, or you can go to wildmagepress.com to receive previews prior to the release. The first issue will include an article on Star Dragons written by a space plasma scientist, Imogene Gingell. New rune-powered vehicles and travel options by Aaron Roberts. Kukulan, a town in the Cloudlands of Nim. And Atraxis the Crystalline, a powerful orc mage, friend or foe, for the Pathfinder 2e game. Thoughts?
Yeah, it seems cool. You have $5 a month, or you can buy each issue for $15. We know, if you follow D&D, you're probably well acquainted with Hannah Rose, who's worked on Arcadia magazine for MCDM, lots of D&D official projects, often as an editor. Clara Daly is a graphic designer who's worked for Darrington Press, MCDM, and others. The two work together on Tal'Dorei's campaign setting Reborn, which is this puppy right here. And in an interview with Polygon, they talked, you can see the art that they are using, that'll be in this next issue. They said they're paying top dollar for articles with an eye towards creating sustainability for creators in the TTRPG space. They say they play test in 2 stages for all of this. It's important for them to get the balance of things right. So, I mean, it's really cool. I think that magazines are great. Talking to folks on our Discord, I think there's a mixed feeling as to how magazines work in today's era. I think quarterly probably is good. Even Arcadia, as good as it was, I felt like it was a little too much too often. So I think fewer articles that are very good, spaced out quarterly, probably is the way to go. I hope this works. I'd like to see these kinds of things exist. But it's hard. It's hard to get the people enough people to derive that value from it, right? Even though they'll all say how much they love Dragon Magazine and miss it.
Right.
It's hard to get them to put their money where their mouth is. So I hope it works.
That is very true. So good luck to everybody there at Wild Mage Press. We also get a little behind the scenes look at Frontiers of Eberron. Teos talked about Frontiers of Eberron a couple weeks ago, and then one of our listeners and supporters shared some cool behind the scenes information. You want to read this for us here, Teos?
Yeah, sure. It was a really neat comment because sometimes you don't know kind of how a product comes to be. And so this quote says, "Great show, and I enjoyed hearing you talk about Keith Baker's new release, Frontiers of Eberron. You may not be aware of this, but he developed and tested some of the material by running a mini campaign for his Patreon supporters. Character development and some aspects of story direction were built with input from questionnaires on Discord and Patreon. And then he ran online games with a revolving cast of supporters playing the main characters. I was lucky to play in a few of those games and have listened to all of the audio video recordings. I learned an immense amount playing with an experienced and creative DM like Keith, but I'm most amazed that he managed to orchestrate a pretty great ongoing story in this way. I played a different character every time I was on, and other people played the same characters in different sessions, but somehow it all came together. I look forward to seeing how the characters and story will be together, might have influenced the final product." And that's really neat, right? That was sort of play tested live with the Patreon folks. I've been fortunate because Keith is in the town that I live in. We've played together a number of times, and he's a fantastic DM, very quick on his feet, as good as they come. And so I have no trouble believing how he was able to take this, spin it into really neat, parts of this setting. So it's cool.
Yep. Frontiers of Eberron is still #1 on the DMs Guild, so you can go there and definitely check it out. And I think they're having a sale right now on the DMs Guild, so you might want to go and check out not just Frontiers of Eberron, but a lot of like starter set things are on sale on the DMs Guild. And last but not least, the Grim Hollow Transformed Kickstarter is live by the time you hear this show. With a link in our show notes, you can go there, or you can just search for Grim Hollow Transformed on Kickstarter, and you can check it out. What's involved in this Kickstarter? Well, let me tell you. It's not that I've been working on it for the last few months or anything. You get a campaign guide with an update to the setting, where we dig down into each region of the world, and then a stretch goal that I think we'll be able to hit will look at one city and give us a detailed description, adventure areas, and so on for one city within each of those regions. You'll also get all the factions of Etheris and then a guide to magic and divinity within that setting update. But also you'll get articles on how to run a dark fantasy campaign. So there'll be a chapter covering all that. We'll present you with variant rules for dark fantasy campaigns. Your character's healing a little too quickly? We could take care of that in a nice, balanced way. New magic items, new curses and new curse monsters, all of that covered in the campaign guide. Then you hop over to the player's guide where the real meat and potatoes are. You get the heritage system where you can do your own choosing of traits for the heritage that you want your character to have.
That's
So
cool.
you want to play dwarf, you get a bunch of standard traits. You want to say, well, my dwarf had nothing to do with mining, so I'm going to remove this trait and replace it with this trait because my dwarf grew up, in a merchant human city. You can do all of that, build your own heritages from scratch, etc. We give you a new class called the Monster Hunter, and then new and updated subclasses for not just the Monster Hunter, but for all of the classes. So all the ones that were in the previous book will be updated for 2024, and we will give you at least one and maybe more new subclasses for each class. The transformations, if you have always wanted to use lycanthropy or vampirism or all of this stuff that's in our lore but has never been modeled really well with D&D rules, we give you transformations that will allow you to do that. Updating all the transformations that have been there and adding some new ones as well. New spells, new and updated backgrounds and feats to match the 2024 rules, new and updated special equipment in the player's guide, and more.
Wow.
And you can't have a great campaign without having some adventures. So we are also offering 5 and possibly more with stretch goals adventures, one for each region. So if you want to specifically set your campaign in a particular region, you can look at this adventure and it will give you a way to kick off your campaign and to show you what sorts of campaigns you can play in that particular region. And if all of that's not enough, you know how lots of Kickstarters say, we will support you, choose a virtual tabletop and you will be supported? We give you that for D&D Beyond.
Whoa.
So if you choose D&D Beyond as your virtual play area of choice, you'll be able to pick D&D Beyond, and you will be able to purchase that material from the player's guide ahead of time.
Wow. Where do I get this, Shawn?
You can go to Kickstarter.com and search for Grim Hollow Transformed, and you will see it all. Or you could just go to grim-hollow.com. And well, there's not time to get the preview stuff now because this show comes out Wednesday and this kicks off on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see all of the great stuff in the Kickstarter.
Fantastic. So when was the last time you slept?
Oh, it's been a while. I haven't slept well in a while. Let's put it that way.
But we're getting a cool book, so it's all right.
You are getting a couple of cool books, some cool adventures, and possibly more. We may have more to discuss as the Kickstarter progresses. So keep an eye on this space.
When you will get the actual book, you'll open it and you'll feel Shawn's sleep somewhere in those pages.
Yes, the sleep. My sleep has been used in the ink that prints these books.
I can't wait to get my hands on this. Awesome.
And in the resin that makes up all the cool minis and other maps and everything that you can buy. Ghostfire does an incredible job with its manufacturing of stuff. So I'm not a big collector, but if I were, I would be all over this. So that, my friends, is our news and commentary section.